history. I got out of the Air Force in 1960, and I was looking for a job. I went down Carnegie Avenue in Cleveland, and I saw an outfit called Friden Incorporated. And I had no idea. I thought maybe they made cash registers, but I think that was a different name, similar to Friden. Anyway, it turned out that they were basically into calculators and adding machines, and Carl Friden was a mechanical genius. How he came up with all of the different equipment that he did design. This one later came out in I think it was earlier in the 40s. A company called Commercial Controls took a basic Model A IBM typewriter and converted it so that it read paper tape, similar to a teletype machine. And but the teletype used 5-channel tape, whereas in binary, Friden, in order to execute all of the functions that they needed, put it into 8-channel. There was also a model JU, Just-A-Writer, which used 7-channel tape, and it was used basically in the check writing, not necessarily check producing, where a model ABA Flexowriter printed using type bars the ABA characters at the bottom of your checks, which are those funny looking symbols and all of the appropriate numerics.
Like the routing numbers.
But it was so big a can of worms, because being a type bar, alignment was very critical. These ABA characters had to hit exactly right in order to put carbon, what did they call that? It was a carbon ribbon, I guess, and it would emboss paper with just flakes of black carbon. And then this would be used in producing the checks in the early days. Also, the Just-A-Writer was used in publishing books and manuals, where it had proportional spacing. If you ever recall that the I was like 2 units wide, the W was 5 units wide. So this was another mechanical nightmare, trying to align the type. And I got involved in that, and it was just, you spend almost all day just bending type bars and trying to get it to work. So basically it's seen a lot of history in the different variety of models. Even the VA got involved in using Flexowriters for processing their stuff. Later on, they decided that in order to modernize the Flexowriter, they came out with the model 2200 and 2300 versions. The 2200 had an extremely wide keyboard. It was probably 8 inches wider than this particular model. And over on the right hand side they had function keys, which executed a lot of programmatic functions. This in combination with auxiliary units. If you look in your instruction manual, you'll see auxiliary readers, and in auxiliary reader it would usually use some kind of a loop tape that would allow control of invoicing and order writing, and just took like the customer information that was put on every invoice or order and merge into a unique customer cards. Now there was 2 types of readers and punches. One is just the tape only reader, and then they had a card that was about 3 by 7, and what it allowed for was some manual writing on it for unique items or customers. And these cards, of course, would be put into a tub file and used by the operator to write the invoices and orders. Normally the process was write the order first, and then when it came time for billing, they would take the tape produced during the order writing and invoice from that tape, which had all of the customer information, the sell to, ship to, the item information, the prices. And then along the way they said, well, gee, there must be an easier way to calculate what these totals are for these invoices, so why not add a computer per se to the Flexowriter. So that's where they came out with the so-called CompuTyper. Now the CompuTyper initially used a model STW10 Friden calculator. It had a shifting carriage, and it had add, subtract, multiply functions, divide, and they even came out with a square root machine, which was a fantastic electromechanical device. I did get training on it, but just as I finished the training on the calculator, they came out with the CompuTyper, which used a transistorized processor, and it was the model 6010, and it used basically the same type Flexowriter, the older version, and it used transistors for AND gates and OR gates. In the early binary calculator that was electronically produced, they didn't have the unique transistors in the small packages that we were used to. They used little modular blocks, and they were epoxied in for some reason, I guess so they could control the manufacturing of it. But this first computer or CompuTyper was a desk-sized unit that was probably 5 feet wide, and it was probably 2.5, 3 feet deep, with the Flexowriter mounted on the top, and it had a fabulous memory unit, which at that time the memory was comprised of core memory, which used little ferrite donuts. And at that time the memory capacity was 16 digits in 16 unique numbers per se, or storage units. So a 16 by 16 was probably costing $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 because the ferrite donuts had to be hand wired. And each of these little donuts, the basic concept was that you magnetized it in one direction or the other, and you would send a write current to write like a binary 1 into it. Then you would hit it with a read pulse, and if the donut was magnetized in the one direction, it would flip, and there would be a sense wire which would detect that flip, and that would say, oh yeah, that was a binary 1. So in the process converting numeric, what did they call it? I got a memory lapse here. They're converting normal numeric numbers to digital, which was binary math, and then to convert it back into zeros and ones. So that was the basic initial CompuTyper. Later on, they progressed away from transistors into integrated circuits. They had the model 6010 was the first one that came out in 1960 for some reason. I guess the model must have related to that. And I believe it was manufactured in Nijmegen, Holland by Friden. Then they moved the manufacturing facilities over to San Leandro, California, and took the factory which was making the mechanical calculators. Somewhere along the line they also came out with a electronic calculator. I think it was called, the model was EC130 and EC132, depending upon if you wanted square root capability. But it was not like today's calculator. It was probably almost the size of the Flexowriter, and it had a small, maybe a 5-inch screen, which had, I believe, 4 or 5 lines of data that you could shift up and shift down to multiply and so forth, eventually working down into the small tablet-sized calculators, and now we have it built into cell phones and everything else. But the basic history of the Flexowriter was, it was originally designed by IBM using type bars, and the speed at the time, I believe, was about 535 characters per second. And then in someone's mind they said, we can make it go faster. Well, in the process they came out with this model 2300 and 2200 and increased the speed, which precipitated the breaking of the type bars because it wasn't meant to handle that type of speed and whacking on a platen and so forth. So we did experience a lot of broken type bars. Again, it was trying to make it a little bit quieter by going from the original chain drive inside the Flexowriter. They went to rubber belts, which did quiet it down considerably. I still remember taking service calls at the VA, and they had like 20 of these Model 2200 Flexowriters all in the same room whacking away type bars, and they almost had to have earphones on to quiet it down. But over the years, I've still continued to repair and revamp Flexowriters. It's pretty difficult to find parts nowadays, but every once in a while I'll come across a customer that still has one in the back room, and maybe it's all covered with dust, but I'll try to resurrect it and make it work once again. I do have one other model, SPS, that I've been working on for about the last year and a half, but really not spending too much time on it. But outside of that, it was a modern piece of equipment in its day, before the advent of modern electronic transition. Now it just seems to be such a unique antique, and of course noisy versus something nice and quiet in today's marketplace. But that's basically the history of the Friden Flexowriter, which eventually was purchased by Singer Company, which knew nothing about, I don't think, data processing, and eventually they turned the company into a losing proposition. They eventually sold the repair business to TRW, and they continued using their service technicians to repair everything from mainframes to mini computers. And I think even today TRW is still in business, but I haven't checked recently to see if they're still around. But it's the story of the Friden Flexowriter.